Hello YouTube, Flightsimguy here, continuing my Middle Eastern tour. I am in Baghdad and I'm going to Kuwait. This time I'm flying my favorite aircraft, the ERJ-145, and I'm in FSX Steam. Now, while I go through the startup, I want to point something out here. If you look at the top left corner, you'll see that my frames is in the single digits, and it's kind of sort of slowed down my interaction with the cockpit while I was doing the startup. By the time I got around to the taxi, I had to fix it. And the problem was I had the FSX.exe executable for Steam running in Windows 7 compatibility mode. I don't recall why I did that, but I had to go ahead and take that off, and once I did, everything went back to normal. So, going from Baghdad to Kuwait City, and it's a very short flight, about 350 miles. And I can tell you a thing or two about Kuwait. I actually spent time in Kuwait 100 days back in 1997, and because of that, I have a lot of things I can share with you in this video, and it's probably a good idea that I do that. Every day as I get older and older, I forget more and more crap from my past, so it's good to get it down on the record regarding my experiences with my experience in Kuwait at Ahmed Al-Jabar Air Base. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Standard procedure: setting up the guidance panel. I think I already did the flight management computer. Or maybe I didn't. I don't recall. Oh, and another thing to mention with the Middle Eastern tour, I've noticed the barometric pressures on all the airports that I'm taking off from. The readings are just off the wall. Right here, it's 29.55. I had no idea your altimeter could go that low. 29.55, and the temperature itself was like 37 degrees Fahrenheit. So, reason for that low altimeter reading is because it is so hot. When it's that hot, the air is thin and it's less pressure. So it took a little bit to get used to that. That aside, it's just the usual startup. I'm going through all of the stuff right now. And I did not do the flight management computer. I'm doing it now, but obviously I'll cut out most of it. Alright, so we got the flight management computer set up. We'll proceed with the power up of the aircraft. While I'm doing that, let me go ahead and talk about how is it I wound up in Kuwait. After the first Gulf War, the United States maintained no-fly zones in the north and the south of Iraq, and they had rotated in people from various, Air Force assignments through the north and the south. Everyone had to do their turn, and what happened was my squadron got a wreck. They wanted someone of at least the rank of major or higher to fill the executive officer position at a combat group in Kuwait. Well, my squadron commander, not the one to say no, said, "Hey, I don't have a major, but I have a second lieutenant you can have." And they were like, "Okay, whatever." So I got picked to send out to be the executive officer of a group. I'm a communications officer, a software engineer to be more specific. I don't know anything about being an XO, and boy, I was going to learn that the hard way. Anyway, I was sent over there, and my job was to replace the departing executive officer, who was a lieutenant colonel in the reserves. Hang on a second, let me go ahead and take care of this.
Baghdad, ground, Embraer, Papa, Hotel, Romeo, X-ray, Bravo, with Yankee. Request taxi to the active, south, departure. Embraer, Papa, Hotel, Romeo, X-ray, Bravo, taxi to and hold short of runway 33, right via taxiway X-ray, Sierra, Sierra 1. Contact tower on 131.7 when ready. taxi 2 and hold short runway 33 right via taxi.
All right.
Sierra, Sierra.
As I was saying, I was replacing the existing executive officer, who was a lieutenant colonel from the reserves, and it was kind of weird because when I showed up, first of all, everybody was surprised that the new EXO was this black kid, and the second thing that surprised everyone was the new EXO was a second lieutenant. And believe me, no one was more surprised than I was. The only good thing about being the executive officer at a combat group in Kuwait is that I had my own living quarters, while everybody else lived in a tent. So I had good quarters, but that was about it. That aside, the entire assignment, I wouldn't call it a disaster, but I was in way over my head. All right, so we got this set up. I had to cut a new track and restart Steam because the frames was horrible. But here it's back in the 20s and 30s, and we're just gonna go ahead and taxi out to the runway and take off. One thing you'll notice, and this is the second or third stop in my tour. All the airports I've arrived at so far, and I think I've flown to Saudi Arabia, Baghdad, and then into Kuwait. All the airports I've gone to were designed exactly the same. They all have two runways, 15 left, 15 right, 33 left, 33 right, parallel. In Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and as you'll see here in Kuwait. I thought that was very, very unusual. All these airports, the runway orientations were exactly the same. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and taxi here, get into position, and take off. I was with the 4406th Ops Group in Kuwait, and we had a handful of F-16s and a handful of A-10s that they flew around to make sure that the Iraqis, weren't operating in the air in the no-fly zone. Now, when I got there, I was the only officer that wasn't a pilot, and that alone, I was totally, didn't fit in, totally isolated from everybody else. And my first couple weeks there was actually pretty miserable. It was a tent city. When I first got out there, everyone lived in tents except the senior leadership. We all had our hard constructed hooch. And it really wasn't that bad. I mean, even though it was a tent city, there was a lot of air conditioning. The food was very good. I mean, after all, this is the Air Force. The only thing was, before we all moved into the permanent hard structures that the Kuwaitis built for us, we had to live in tents. As a result, there was not integrated bathrooms in the tents, or lavatories in the tents. You had to walk and use a bathroom in the middle of the night if you need to go to the bathroom. Now, problem with that is there's only a handful of comfort stations or bathrooms around the base, and depending on where your tent was, you had a decent walk to get there in the middle of the night. We're talking several hundred yards, and a lot of guys, they just didn't do that. What they'd do is they'd get their empty water bottles, and there was literally thousands of water bottles everywhere because we had to drink bottled water, and they'd keep them, and they'd simply pee in them at night and throw it in the trash. Then the poor bastards who had trash duty had to pick up the trash, throw it in there, and often these bottles of urine would just come crashing all over them. Alright, so we're getting ready to take off here. Landing lights on, taxi light off. Make sure that we're squawking. Check your takeoff configuration. Check your trim. And these runways, like I said, they are very long, 10 to 12,000 feet. And I think I forgot to compute my V speeds, but I know what the speeds are in this thing, so. Alright, so let's go ahead and do the takeoff. Afterwards, I'll resume my discussion on what it's like living in Tent City. Alright, we got a good takeoff there. I'm gonna go ahead and spin this bird around, get on course. Alright, so Tent City, yeah. You have a long way to walk in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. And like I said, a lot of guys didn't do that. They just pee in a bottle and throw it in the trash. And if you did have to walk several hundred yards in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, you had to run a gauntlet of camel spiders, scorpions, and or snakes. So that part of, living in Kuwait was kind of interesting. Alright, so making our turn. It's funny. FSX Steam depicts the Middle East different than P3D. P3D has the textures for the desert to be more tan. Here it looks more normal. That's rather interesting. Alright, so let's talk about the heat. A lot of people complain, it's hot, 97, 98 degrees, 100 degrees, 105. Let me tell you something. You don't know hot until you've been in the Middle Eastern desert in the middle of summer. I mean, we're talking sweltering heat here. We're talking temperatures of what? 37 degrees Celsius? That's what? 130, 140. It is stupid hot. Okay? It is so hot that you don't sweat. Okay, now does that make any sense? It makes perfect sense. It is so hot and dry that you don't sweat. You do sweat, but the second the sweat gets to the surface of your skin, it evaporates. That's why you be out there and you look at folks in the sweltering heat and nobody's sweating. Well, they are sweating. It just evaporates before it has time to condense. And because of that, if you're not careful, you'll easily pass out from a heat stroke or something. So we're constantly chugging water. Also, in the comfort stations or the bathrooms or whatever you want to call them, there's no such thing as hot water. I mean, yes, there's cold water. There's two taps, hot and cold. Well, you turn on both of them, blistering hot water's coming out, no matter what. So there's no such thing as cold water, and everyone had to shower in the morning. If you tried showering anytime during the day, the water is going to burn your skin. You have to shower in the morning. That way the water has quote-unquote cooled off to the point where it's tolerable. It's still pretty hot, but that's what you have to do, is shower in the morning. And our water supply was kept in these huge bladders that we had covered under a tent, and even then the water was still ridiculously hot. And let me tell you, this is the desert. It's dry. There's a lot of sand. And what that means is totally epic static discharges. So whenever you're walking anywhere, to do whatever, and then you touch something, here in the winter in America, you touch something and get a little zit or a little zap. Back in Kuwait, I'm talking blue bolts of lightning, at least an inch, will jump between you and whatever it is you're gonna touch, and I mean, it's just mutant. Especially when you have to run the vacuum and pick up all that sand. The static buildup was just out of this world. Alright, so what are we doing here? We're getting on course. Very good takeoff. I don't think I may have ran warp for a little bit in this flight, ×8. I don't recall. But for the most part, the takeoff was relatively uneventful. Now, one of the things that caught my attention when I first got to our assignment in Kuwait. Oh, by the way, I flew over from PSAB, Prince Sultan Air Base, up to Kuwait in a C-130. That was pretty cool. I actually got to go into the cockpit and hang out with them guys. The pilot was a light colonel, his co-pilot was a first lieutenant, and the flight engineer was a master sergeant, which I thought was rather interesting. And yeah, we got in there and I hung out in there with them for about 10-15 minutes, and relatively uneventful. Those C-130s are ridiculously stable, very easy to fly, and I have to admit, P3D's implementation of the desert is a lot more realistic than this one, because when we were flying over, that's all I saw was tan, sand, and desert everywhere. But anyway, once I got there, and I had to drive around the base for whatever reason, the first thing I noticed was they had these bunkers. They looked like igloos. They were hardened, and they had taxiways coming out of them, and they all networked and led to the runways. Well, it was where the Kuwaiti Air Force kept their warplanes. Now, as you may recall, Iraq ran into Kuwait and took over everything, and they annexed it. So, first thing they did, obviously, was to take over the military installations. And so we had all these bunkers, or these igloos, or hangars, whatever you want to call them. And all of them had a bombed out hole in the top of them, where the F-117s dropped their laser guided bombs to destroy the bunker and destroy what was in there. And a lot of the buildings had bullet holes in them. Now I remember the Gulf War was in 1990, as I may recall, and this was in 97. So there was a 7-year gap, and I'm thinking, why is the base such a wreck? I mean, after the Iraqis got pushed out, you'd think the Kuwaitis would fix everything and rebuild it. Well, they didn't. I'm thinking, these people have more money than they know what to do with. Why didn't they rebuild their base? And everything was still bombed out, and all the buildings were shot up, and nothing was fixed. I thought that was rather unusual, so not exactly sure where the priorities were, but anyway. Okay, so that was the main observation I had about the Air Force base that we're assigned to.
Airport information, Gulf 2126, Zulu, weather, wind 314, at 9, visibility 10, sky clear, temperature 38.
So my first few days when I was over in Kuwait, Kuwait's on the other side of the world, obviously, and my body clock took a while to get adjusted to it. The first few days I was there, I could not sleep at night, quote unquote night. My body clock was a total mess, so I had to go see the flight surgeon, who gave me some Benadryl. Thought that was rather interesting. And like I said, most of the officers were all pilots, F-16 and A-10s. Some of the guys in ATC, they were officers too, but they may or may not have been pilots. No, I think they were all pilots too. And I worked for a guy named Lieutenant Colonel. I'm sorry. No, he was a full bird colonel, and his name was Lieutenant Colonel Holland. I don't remember his first name. And because his name was Holland, his nickname was Dutch. And he was a very nice guy. His deputy commander, I don't recall what his name was. But when I first got there, the guys that I worked for in the command center, the command bunker, whatever, they were relatively nice. Now, when I got there, Colonel Holland was leaving, and his deputy was leaving, and their replacement was a guy named Colonel Autry. I don't remember his first name, but it was Colonel Autry, and because his last name was Autry, his nickname was Cowboy. And his deputy was an F-16 pilot, and I don't remember his name. His nickname was Bud. Anyhow, make a long story short, those guys were major jerks. The fact that their XO was this black second lieutenant, I guess it gave them a good justification to make my life a living hell. Personally, I don't think my race had anything to do with it, but my rank had everything to do with it, and they were just assholes to the max. And I think they did it because they figured, you know what, we need to teach this kid a lesson, show him what it's like out here. And they were just hard on me for no good reason. I remember towards after Colonel Autry got settled in, I went up to him and said, okay, so when am I leaving? He's like, what? I said, look, it's pretty obvious you don't want me here. I don't want to be here. So when am I leaving? And I put him on the spot. And he didn't say it, but he didn't say it, but after a while, we kind of got settled into a routine, and eventually my replacement showed up. But by then, everything was running a lot more smoothly. But that aside, I've come to learn that officers that are fighter pilots, not bomber pilots, not transport pilots, not any other pilots, but fighter pilots, tend to be more of bigger jerks than others. And I think anyone who has been in the military, whether it's the Air Force or the Navy, they can back that up.
Kuwait Tower, Pacifica 5332, at runway 15 left, ready for takeoff, IFR construction start. Pacifica 5332, clear for takeoff, runway 15 left.
Okay, so daily life in Kuwait when I was on base, it was hard work. I worked at least 12 to 14 hours a day, every day, for about the first 6 weeks. That was just, brutal. Having said that, working that hard really isn't that bad, or working those long hours isn't that bad, because you're in a deployed situation. I mean, there's no, I'm not going to go out and go to the mall or anything. There's nothing to do except to work and hang out. So, a lot of hard work. The weather, hot and sunny every day. It rained maybe once, and it didn't even rain, just a couple of raindrops while the clouds passed over. Frequent sandstorms. And sandstorms, they were interesting because once the storm got over the base, and once all that sand got whipped up into the air, it blocked out the sky, blocked out the sun, and it got dark as in night dark. You can't see anything. And that sand, it's like talcum powder. It gets into everything. You gotta put your gas mask on. You gotta put your goggles on. And the sand gets into everything. No matter how much you try to put tape around your windows and whatnot to seal the air out, somehow it gets in. What else? Oh yeah, the critters. Let's talk about the critters. There were three main critters you had to be concerned of when you were in the desert. Camel spiders, scorpions, I don't recall what kind of scorpions, and snakes. Now, in the daytime, you're not going to see them because, like everybody else, they're trying to get away from the heat. But in the nighttime, and the base that we're on was a 24-hour operation, that's when they come out. And let me talk about the camel spiders first. Those are some mean sons of bitches. They're these mutant, huge spiders, and don't ask me why or how this happened, but I've been chased by camel spiders before. Not exactly sure what they'd do if they ever caught me, but they're very aggressive, and they'll actually run towards you. Their claim to fame is when they eat stuff, they inject it with some sort of local anesthetic, which numbs the area, and they can just go ahead and eat at their leisure. So whatever it is they're eating doesn't know that they're being eaten. And there was a story about this army guy. I think it was at Camp Doha. That's where the army had a base, and for some reason, he felt the need to quote-unquote rough it by sleeping outdoors under the sky, outside the tent. I don't recall what his reasoning was. But anyhow, he was sleeping in a sleeping bag, and a camel spider got a hold of him one night, and to make a long story short, he ate half of this guy's face off. And the guy never felt anything because the spider was injecting him with this local anesthetic that numbed his face or numbed the area where he's about to eat. So he woke up, half the skin or the skin on half of his face was gone. And we all heard that story. So we were very, very cautious of camel spiders. Scorpions, the rule is very simple. Double check your boots in the mornings. They like to hide up in there. And with regards to the camel spiders or the scorpions, which one's more deadly? Well, we found out by, I don't know how these guys did this, but they trapped a camel spider and they trapped a scorpion, and they put them together in this little pit to see who would win if they fight to the death. I'm not kidding. The guys on the base, they actually did that. And I saw it. And the camel spider actually won, very handily too. Snakes, never saw any live ones. Saw a few dead ones that we got a hold of and got cut up to pieces. But I mean, seeing evidence of these guys was easy as pie. They left a trail in the sand, easily identifiable. And any little nook and cranny on the rocks or spaces under the permanent structures, little holes in the landscape, stay away from it. Snakes everywhere. All right, let's take a look about. Let's talk about where we are. I think. Let me see here. Yeah, this is the point where I'm coming into land. I think I screwed up my approach. Actually, my approach was fine, but I screwed it up in the flight management system because I was trying to enter some final waypoints with regards to what runway I was coming into. Anyway, so it's not in the flight management computer, but if you look at my CDI, I'm lined up with the runway. So I'm coming in for my first attempt at landing. The approach plates for these airports, they're readily available on the internet. Just go ahead and Google the airport code and approach plates. They'll come right up. And the frequencies and the runways, they all seem to work. Okay, there's a runway. And we're coming in. I think it's, I was coming into 33 right. Okay, pretty straightforward approach. Shouldn't have any issues. Go ahead and call. Get my landing clearance. What else can I tell you about my time in Kuwait? Didn't go off base much. In fact, only went off base maybe a handful of times. One to get a haircut. Another one, I don't recall what it was, but the only trip I remembered was when me and some OSI officers went off base to have lunch with the Kuwaiti officers at TGI Fridays in Kuwait City. That was very interesting. First of all, we had to take our BDU tops off. We weren't allowed to leave our base with our uniforms on, otherwise we'd be easily identifiable to the locals who may want to take shots at us. So we had to take our BDU tops off and put on just a regular casual top. And the TGI Fridays we went to in Kuwait City was right by the ocean. That was absolutely beautiful. Everything was good. And let's see here, we're coming into land. Let's go ahead and check out this landing. Oh yeah, that's right. My TCAS went bonkers. There was this other plane. He was around me somewhere. I think he got a go-around order. But yeah, my TCAS was absolutely blowing up. I think he may have been coming into the other runway or something. But don't worry, all of this warning crap goes away in a few seconds. Yeah, I think he may have been on the approach with me. Somebody got a go-around order. I remember that in the ATC communication. Alright, check out this landing. If you look at my trim, you see what it says right there? I am trimmed out of my behind. And that caused all sorts of problems. That's the thing, when you're coming in on final with the autopilot on, when you turn off the autopilot, take a look at your trim and get everything resolved before you actually do your flare. That's what caused me to screw up here. The plane had a hard time. I had a hard time getting it down. And by the time I realized what was wrong with the trim, I tried to fix it, and then this happened. That runway is a mile long. I could have saved that landing, but I chose to do the right thing and just do a go around. I could have salvaged that, but I figured let me just do a go around. So anyway, as I was saying, the TGI Fridays was right by the ocean in Kuwait City, and first thing I noticed when I was driving there is the cars. All the cars in Kuwait City, they were all European. They were all Mercedes or Lamborghini, or there were a lot of Bentleys, Rolls-Royce. Didn't see any Fords, didn't see any Toyotas. It was all high-end luxury cars. Every single one of them. I never saw that many luxury cars at the same time on the roads in my life. But hey, that's how they roll. Have a lot of money. And in an earlier video, I made mention of how beautiful Persian women are. And so we got out, went inside and everything, and I saw girls, women, and they were just drop dead gorgeous. But take it in strides. However, I did not know this. When you're in Kuwait, if you're a guy, it is perfectly acceptable for you to gawk openly and make catcalls at women. Obviously, I didn't do it, but the Kuwaiti officers did, in plain sight. They weren't being exactly inconspicuous about it, and I just thought that was weird. So those Middle Eastern countries, how they treat their women, depends on where you are. Saudi Arabia is the most strict, but Kuwait is very Western, or the most Western of all the Gulf nations, and I thought that was kind of weird, but anyway. So yeah, that was good. And the menu at TGI Fridays, everything about TGI Fridays was as American as the TGI Fridays down the street. And with all that's happening between what's happening in the Middle East and death to America and all the Great Satan and all that bullshit, let me tell you something. One thing about the folks in the Middle East, if anyone from the Middle East gets a degree from a university in America, that degree is gold. You can write your own ticket. A professional or a high-level education earned in the United States is very valuable in the Middle East and in the rest of the world. So make no mistake about it. There's a lot of demand for American high-level education. So that's good to know. All right, coming in for my do-over. Let's see how this works out.
Light slope. 100, light slope.
Not a bad landing. I don't feel bad that I had to do a go around. I mean, you know, it's been about a week since I've done any flying, and take any amount of time off, your skills get rusty. Alright, so we're in Kuwait. Next stop on the Middle Eastern tour is going to be somewhere in Iran. Baghdad, Iran and Iraq are right next to each other, so I kind of sort of went out of my way to go down to Kuwait. And I'm going to go back to Iran, and I'm thinking of taking the 777 for that flight, even though it's only 400 miles. I want to fly that plane again, see if I can figure out what's going on with that autopilot and get some more time in it. I'm very comfortable with the Captain Sim 757 and 767. I've also settled in very well with the Quality Wings 757. So I want to do get some more time in on 777. Also, it's been a month and a half since Flightsimguy. Their 787, Quality Wing 787, should be coming out momentarily. Alright, listen now. Did I cover everything regarding my Kuwait experience? So now, yep, that's about it. I have nothing to show for my time in the desert except my military records and a picture book that everyone gets once they roll off or they leave the assignment. And didn't have a camera, didn't take any pictures. I mean, this was, a long time ago. I didn't really realize the value of such experiences and how important it is to capture them, either committed to memory, pictures, the written word, or whatever. And it was a rough 100 days, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. It was the most memorable assignment in my Air Force career. So, and that's it. We'll go ahead and wrap this up. Let's go ahead and go through the shutdown. For some reason, turning off the engines here didn't kill the engines. You actually have to kill your mixture settings, which is the lever that I have on my yoke. Otherwise, the routine power down, turn off the fuel pump, turn on the APU, turn off all the lights, turn off the hydraulics, blah, 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 blah. Alright, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Yeah, the next flight is going to be to Iran. I'm going to try that in the 777. My name is Flightsimguy. Hope you found this video interesting. I will see you next time.
Shore 1468, contact ground on 121.7. 121.7, Shore 1468.